Happy New Year. I'm Claire Hazelgrove, and I'm Filton and Bradley Stokes' Labour candidate for MP. What an important year this is for all of us across Britain. We will finally get to have our say. Do we want another half a decade of decline with the Conservatives, or a fresh start with Labour? Coming from a family of teachers, NHS workers and RAF service members, I've long believed in stepping forward to serve others. Service in politics. A government that puts you first. Ministers that operate with integrity. A Prime Minister who makes every decision he takes with hard-working people in mind. The Prime Minister that Keir Starmer will be. Keir's career has been built on serving others. And he hasn't just delivered that service, but he has created the change needed to make sure it's lasting. Friends, could you have imagined 4 years ago that we would be here? The January of an election year with Labour positioned as a government in waiting. Our party has fundamentally changed. And that change has been driven by Keir. Not for the party, not for change's sake, but for hard-working people. Labour is now back in the service of working people. Service. A value lacking in British politics for far too long. And people don't ask for too much. Stability, security, fairness. Knowing that if we work hard, then we should have the same chance as anyone else to fulfil our potential. That we'll be able to provide for our families through good wages earned from decent jobs, to enjoy life and give back in our own way. But after 14 years of Conservative government, that's no longer guaranteed. With waiting lists up, crime up, and the cost of living still going up, simple things are much harder than they should be. This year, you can choose a better way. I know it doesn't always feel like this when you're up against so much. But with the election around the corner, you have the power to change things for the better. You can choose to tell this failed and out-of-touch Conservative government that they've had 14 years of chances. Now, it'll take time to deliver the scale of the change that Britain needs. But by voting Labour, you will have a government on your side again. A government that believes in politics as a force for good. A mission-led Labour government focused relentlessly on improving the lives of working people and their families. But one thing we can be sure of is that if we don't vote for change, it won't happen. So in 2024, no matter how you voted before, I ask you to look again at Labour. Let's give change a chance, and together we can get Britain's future back. It's my honour to introduce the person who could not be more dedicated to building this better Britain. Please welcome Keir Starmer. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Claire. You will be a great candidate, a really great candidate for Filton and Bradley Stoke, and I hope in time an even better MP. And it's great to be here again, looking at the next generation of aircraft wings. You can see some of the instruments behind me. This is the third time, and I love it, and it features pretty heavily in quite a number of my speeches. But look, on behalf of the Labour Party, thank you for being here this morning, and Happy New Year. Now, as a politician, you've got to be a bit careful with these New Year messages. We'll all remember Boris Johnson's prediction of a fantastic year ahead. That was 2020. And then last year, I stuck my neck out and occasionally predicted glory for Arsenal. So I'll pass on that one today. But look, there is one thing that we can be sure is coming this year, and I'm ready for it. The thought of millions of people right across our country putting a cross on that ballot paper. It's what we've been waiting for, preparing for, fighting for, a year of choice, a chance to change Britain, a clock that is ticking on this government. Because whether it's in the spring or later in the year, the moment when power is taken out of Tory hands and given, not to me, but to you, that moment is getting closer by the second. So, if you've spent the last 14 years volunteering to keep your park clean, your library open, for children to have opportunities, if you've been breaking your back to keep trading, steering your business through the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the challenge of Brexit, and the chaos of Westminster, if you've been serving our country, whether in scrubs or in the uniform of your regiment, and what you want now is a politics that serves you, then make no mistake, this is your year. The opportunity to shape our country's future rests in your hands. And that is a New Year message of hope. The hope of democracy, the power of the vote, the potential for national renewal, the chance finally to turn the page, lift the weight off our shoulders, unite as a country and get our future back. For 4 years I've been working for this. 4 years working for the chance to tilt this country firmly and decisively back towards the interests of working people. It's been a long, hard slog. And I won't lie, I've hated the futility of opposition, the powerlessness and, yes, the pain that comes from watching the Tories drive the country I love into the rocks of decline. I didn't come into politics for that. I didn't expect a front row seat on this Tory performance art, a song and dance for your political attention, because they find performing so much easier than the hard graft of practical achievement. No. I came into politics to serve, to get things done, to strive each and every day to make a difference to the lives of working people. That's what gets me up in the morning. And if you can put aside the reality of Westminster just for a moment, it's why I still believe in politics. I had a long career before this at the Crown Prosecution Service as a human rights lawyer, in my work with the Police Service of Northern Ireland. I've looked into the eyes of people I served and represented, and I've seen reflected back the knowledge that government can make or break a life. Literally, when it comes to work I've done with people on death row, life and death decisions in your hands. Now, there's a pressure with that, of course there is. But that's the responsibility of justice and public service. And it's the responsibility of serious government. This isn't a game. Politics shouldn't be a hobby, a pastime for people who enjoy the feeling of power. And nor should it be a sermon from on high, a self-regarding lecture, vanity dressed up as virtue. No, it should be a higher calling. The power of the vote, the hope of change and renewal married to the responsibility of service. That's what I believe in. And yes, I believe it's still the best way to change our country for the better. Its success or failure is written into the walls of every community in this country. The hospital your children were born in, the home you live in, the wage in your pocket, the opportunities in your town, the sense of pride or unease when you walk down your street. That's all politics. So this year at the general election, against the tide of cynicism in Westminster, the gauntlet of fear the Tories will unleash, and most of all, the understandable despair of a downtrodden country, I will ask the British people to believe in it again. I will say, you're right to be anti-Westminster, right to be angry about what politics has become, but hold on to the flickering hope in your heart that things can be better, because they can. You can choose it. You can choose the hope of national renewal, the responsibility of service, what politics can and should be. And you can reject the pointless populist gestures, the low-road cynicism that the Tories believe is all you deserve. That's all they've got left now. After 14 years, with nothing good to show, no practical achievements to point towards, no purpose beyond the fight to save their own skins, this is their only project. They can't change Britain, so they will try to undermine the possibility of change itself, take Britain down to their level, kick the hope out of all of us. But I believe in this country. I believe in its spirit. I believe in its people, its businesses, its communities. And most of all, I believe that if the British people see respect and service in their politics, if they see a plan which matches the ambition and pride they have for their community, a path finally to an economy that rewards and respects their efforts, then yes, they will commit to the mission of national renewal, will believe that Britain can get its future back. But I'm under no illusions. This is a huge test. We're trying not just to defeat the Tories, but to defeat their entire way of doing politics. A mindset that seeks out any differences between the people of this country and, like weeds between the paving stones, will pull apart the cracks so ultimately they can divide and rule. I have to warn you, they will leave no stone unturned this year. Every opportunity for division will be exploited for political potential. That's a given. But do not doubt for a second that we're ready for it. Do not doubt that we will show the British people that the real risk is 5 more years of a Tory government that will be even more entitled, even more self-serving, even more complacent, that your vote can be taken for granted. And yet, at the same time, we have to bring the country together, have to earn trust as well as votes, nurture a spirit of national unity. That's what's distinctive about our job this year. To truly defeat this miserablest Tory project, we must crush their politics of divide and decline with a new Project Hope. Not a grandiose utopian hope, not the hope of the easy answer, the quick fix, the miracle cure. People have had their fill of that from politicians over the last 14 years. No, they need credible hope, a frank hope, a hope that levels with you about the hard road ahead, but which shows you a way through, light at the end of the tunnel, the hope of the certain destination. That's why the national missions we've set out, the measurable goals, whether it's the highest growth in the G7, halving violence against women and girls, clean power by 2030. Now, they are unapologetically ambitious. I know they will take hard work, determination, patience, a true national effort. And for many people, that invites a sharp intake of breath, a raised eyebrow, a question. Can this really be done? But look, what really keeps me up at night is a different reaction altogether. The biggest challenge we face, bar none, the shrug of the shoulder. Because this is the paradox of British politics right now. Everyone agrees we're in a huge mess. Services on their knees, an economy that doesn't work for working people, even when it grows, let alone when it stagnates like now. Everyone agrees as well that it's been like this for a while, that Britain needs change, wants change, is crying out for change. And yet, trust in politics is now so low, so degraded, that nobody believes you can make a difference anymore. Also that after the sex scandals, the expenses scandals, the waste scandals, the contracts for friends, even in a crisis like the pandemic, some people have looked at us and concluded we're all just in it for ourselves. A nation that is so exhausted, tired, despairing even, that they've given up on hope. A national mood which, if we aren't successful with our Project Hope, the Tories will subtly seek to exploit. I mean, seriously, after failing to deliver change, after ludicrously pretending that they could represent change, they now sense the opportunity of a new strategy, an attempt to take the change option off the table altogether. And not just at the next election. No, their strategy has also one eye on salting the earth of Britain's future. A plan to make sure that if Labour does earn the right to serve, we will find it harder to bring our country together for the common good. So I say to every voter in this country, know that all this is coming your way. Know that if we are to heal the wounds of the past 14 years and move forward, Britain must come together. And that means we will need you. But also know that whether you're thinking of voting Labour for the first time, whether you always vote Labour, or whether you've no intention of voting Labour whatsoever, my party will serve you. That's who we are now. A changed party. No longer enthralled to gesture politics. No longer a party of protest. A party of service. Rebuilt, renewed, reconnected to an old partnership, a Labour partnership, that we serve working people as they drive Britain forward. So this is what I promise, my side of the deal. The answer to the question, why Labour? I promise a new purpose, to drag politics in this country back to service, tilt our economy back towards the interests of working people, reward their efforts fairly once again. I promise a new plan with new priorities, 5 national missions that will sweep away the era of Tory division. A plan for the long term, with higher growth, a reformed planning system, no longer blocking the homes, infrastructure and investment we need. Safer streets, more police in your town, cracking down on antisocial behaviour. Cheaper bills, with GB Energy, a new public company, using clean British power, not foreign oil and gas. More opportunities for your children. New technical excellence colleges, training our kids in the skills they need and businesses want. Better mental health support in schools. Expert teachers in every classroom. paid for by removing tax breaks on private schools. And our NHS back on its feet with a plan to cut the waiting lists, paid for by removing the non-dom tax status. 2 million more appointments every year in an NHS clearing the backlog 7 days a week. And written through this new plan, I also promise this: a total overhaul of how we approach the economy and government. On government, it means a new level of ambition and focus. Now, I ran a public service for years. The clue is in that word, service. What the Tories have done to our public realm over the past 14 years, not just the cuts, also the denigration of the people who serve this country, the total lack of respect. Honestly, there are no words. But I also have to say this: I don't see our job as going back to some kind of golden age. I don't think that's how working people look at things at all. Government in this country is too centralised and controlling, and because of that, too disconnected from the communities it needs to serve. And yet, despite hoarding all that power, it also lacks ambition. A view of the potential of government that is content just to mop up problems after the fact, armed only with a big state chequebook. We have got to change this. It is vital for taking on the profound challenges of our era: the rising geopolitical temperature, climate change, terrorism, securing our borders, the revolutions in science, energy, technology that are reshaping everything we know about our world. So I promise this: a new mindset, mission government, an understanding at the core of everything we do that it is our job to tackle tomorrow's challenges today. On the economy, it means a deeper argument about who growth should serve, where it comes from, who it comes from, where is the great untapped potential. And the answer to every one of those questions, the Labour answer: working people, communities casually ignored and disregarded, passed over as sources of economic dynamism, subjected to the Tory argument that thinks growth comes from driving down their wages and security, while they in turn should be grateful for anything handed down from those at the top. You know, I've read that the Tories want to fight the election on this terrain, that they think their economic comfort zone still has some purchase. But let me tell you, what used to be their strength is now their weakness. The so-called party of business, which now hates business, that boasts about tax cuts while raising taxes higher than at any time since the war. That claim, even now, to be the party of sound finance, but that crashed the economy and made you pay. They have nothing left on this anymore. Their credit rating is 0. And we have turned the tables with a plan for the growth Britain needs. Only Labour will deliver a proper industrial policy and higher investment. Only Labour will bulldoze through the planning red tape and get Britain building. Only Labour will transform our labour market with stronger workers' rights. We don't just expect an election on the economy, we want an election on the economy, and we're ready for that fight, ready to close the book on the trickle-down nonsense once and for all. And finally, I promise this: a determination to bring our country together, not exploit its divisions. an understanding that Britain's standing in the world can never be taken for granted, and a politics of respect and service that shows zero tolerance towards the darker side of Westminster. Now, don't get me wrong, there are good people in Westminster, people who love their country and want to change it for the better. And yet, a basic principle of any organisation I've worked in outside of politics, that you should follow the rules you set for others, uphold the values you advocate. This just doesn't seem to be followed or understood in Westminster. I mean, honestly, what does anyone think it looks like to the people of this country to see people rewarded, honoured, for crashing the economy under Liz Truss? If your mortgage is going up this year and you see those people swanning around the House of Lords, what do you think? No, I say to all my fellow politicians, Labour and Tory, to change Britain, we must change ourselves. We need to clean up politics. No more VIP fast lanes, no more kickbacks for colleagues, no more revolving doors between government and the companies they regulate. I will restore standards in public life with a total crackdown on cronyism. I've put expense-cheap politicians in jail before, and I didn't care if they were Labour or Tory. And I grew up working class, so spare me the self-serving excuses. They just won't wash. This ends now. Nobody will be above the law in a Britain that I lead. But with respect and service, I also promise this: a politics that treads a little lighter on all of our lives. Because that's the thing about populism or nationalism. Any politics fueled by division. It needs your full attention, needs you constantly focusing on this week's common enemy. And that's exhausting, isn't it? On the other hand, a politics that aspires to national unity, bringing people together, the common good, that's harder to express, less colourful, fewer clicks on social media, and in some ways, it's more demanding of you. It asks you to moderate your political wishes out of respect for the different wishes of others. I mean, 45 million voters can't get everything they want. That's democracy. So no matter the road the Tories take this year, I believe that if people see the commitment to service is always there in politics, if they can see that people in power respect their concerns, then I think a lot of people across the country, after everything we've been through in the last 14 years, will find some hope in that. It will feel different, frankly. The character of politics will change, and with it, the national mood. A collective breathing out, a burden lifted, and then the space for a more hopeful look forward. Because the truth is, it's this kind of politics, and only this kind of politics, that can offer real change. The energy needed for divisive politics is a distraction. You can see that with the SNP in Scotland, or the Tories here in England. And I learnt this firsthand in Northern Ireland. Before the police service of Northern Ireland was set up, the idea that the nationalist community would buy into it in any way was utterly unthinkable. Now, there's always more work to do on that. Peace in Northern Ireland has to be won every day. And yet, with patient listening, with determination, with the people of Northern Ireland coming together, not only with those different to them, not only with those who disagreed with them, but even with those who took up arms against them. The unthinkable happened. Catholic men and women did step up to serve. So don't listen to the siren voices that say we can't change Britain. We can and we will. Don't listen when they say we're all the same. We're not and we never will be. And don't listen when they say politics makes no difference, because it does. If you can't get an affordable home in your town, but with Labour you can, that's a difference worth fighting for. If you can't get a job with regular hours that will let you look after your family, but with Labour you can, that's a difference worth fighting for. If you're a care worker who saved lives during the pandemic and has been rewarded with poverty wages, but with Labour you can get a fair pay agreement, that's a difference worth fighting for. The same is true for our NHS, for our schools, climate change and energy security, securing our borders, restoring Britain's standing, crime and justice. Only Labour will make a difference. Only Labour will drag our politics back to service. Only Labour can lead Britain towards national renewal. And you have the power to vote for it. A party of service with a plan versus a party with nothing to offer because it only cares about itself. Hope or cynicism? A new politics or the same old Westminster? Continued decline with the Tories or national renewal with Labour? Nobody in Britain thinks the years ahead will be easy. But this year is the chance, the only chance, to change our course. The future of Britain in your hands, the power of the vote in your control. And we will fight every day to earn it. Why Labour? Because we serve your interests. Why Labour? Because we will grow every corner of our country. Why Labour? Because we have a plan to take back our streets, switch on Great British Energy, get the NHS back on its feet, tear down the barriers to opportunity and get Britain building again. A partnership with you in pursuit of a new Britain with foundations built to last. The value of hard work restored, sticking plasters rejected, the Tory era of division over. A Britain standing tall again, looking forward again, believing again that tomorrow will be better for your children. That's our future, and this year we get it back. Thank you very much. Oh. Nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to now take some questions from the media. I've got a list. I think I've got everybody on it. One question each. Although I see Beth is here. We're going to start with Chris from the BBC. Chris.
Thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. Happy New Year to you. You say you're right to be anti-Westminster when you're talking to voters, and yet you accuse the Conservatives of being cynical and populist. Are you not talking down the very institutions, the very thing that you aspire to lead? Is that not cheap, irresponsible?
No, I'm talking up the very institutions and the very politics that I believe in. I think that populism and nationalism thrive on division, and that drives a feeling of anti-Westminster, the sense that politicians are simply saying things to gain votes but not believing in what they're saying. I think that's the cynicism that I'm pointing towards. And the choice now at the next election is so clear, which is between 14 years of decline and a decade of national renewal. And I don't think there's almost anyone across the country who doesn't think we've had 14 years of decline. When I say that, People don't quarrel with me and say, no, you're wrong about that, Keir. They know it's been decline. What we're offering is a decade of national renewal. Decade to indicate it's going to take time. National, that it's a national project. And renewal because we want to not just fix the country, but take the country forward. Thank you, Chris. Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Keir Starmer. Part of your pitch today seems to be to try to energise apathetic voters, but beyond the rhetoric in that speech, and there was lots of it, when you get to the nuts and bolts of a Labour government, on public services you say money's so tight you won't invest. On tax you more or less ape the Tories, and you seem to be ditching your one big idea, which is big money for green investment. Your entire pitch seems to be vote Labour to see the back of the Tories. Isn't there a danger that voters will see you not as a leader of change, but one who's overly cautious and timid and who turns them off?
Well, Beth, I think if you look at this distinction, the change that we're offering, the difference that we want to make, between 14 years of decline and a decade of national renewal, they were two fundamentally different things. And underpinning the decade of national renewal, these are not just words. I've set out over the last 12 months 5 national missions that we will seek to achieve over the period of the next Labour government. And they are really ambitious. The idea that there's no change, the highest sustained growth in the G7 felt with living standards improved across the whole of the country, that's huge. Nobody says to me that that's a minor difference. It's a huge, huge difference. Clean power by 2030. There'll be lower bills, energy security, the next generation of jobs. Nobody says to me that's no different to the Tories. They say, how are you going to achieve it? When we say we want safer streets, within which we are committing to halving violence against women and girls. No government or opposition has ever committed to that before. And I know from my work as Chief Prosecutor just how hard that is. Nobody says to me that's no difference. If it's the opportunities that our children need, the skills they need, nobody says that's no different. And whether it's the NHS that is, not just on its knees, on its face at the moment, being picked up and made fit for the future, nobody says to me that's no different. These are huge, fundamental differences. And the power this year is with the voters to vote for that change. So I think there's a huge, clear distinction here. We've set out our case in terms. It is very clearly the risk of going on with 14 more years of this decline, or turning our face to the task of national renewal. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference in politics. Thank you, Beth. Anushka.
Anushka Stana, ITV News. Keir Starmer, you say you want to fight this election on the economy. This week, your party slammed the government for raising taxes, including freezing income tax thresholds. If you don't want voters to be cynical, then level with them. If you win power, will you unfreeze income tax thresholds? Well,
Anushka, look, starting from fundamental principles on this, I do want more people to have more money in their pocket. That's a fundamental principle that we start with. Now, the question is, how do we get to that? And I'm challenged on tax all of the time. The first lever that we want to pull, the first place we will go, is growth in our economy, because that's what's been missing for 14 years. Without growth, we won't have the money to run our public services, to provide what is desperately needed. So that's why we've put all of our focus on growth and on the economy. Now, where we are going to make adjustments to tax, we've been really clear about what that looks like. So we've said what we're going to do with VAT on private schools, the non-dom status, the loopholes that we have. So where we are making adjustments, we've been very, very clear about it. And as Pat McFadden said this morning on the media, any tax cuts have to be fair and affordable, and we have to be realistic about that. But I think the place to go is to growth on this. But the idea, frankly, that the Tories can lecture anybody about tax cuts or tax rises is now ludicrous. We've got a higher tax burden now than at any time since the Second World War. That's every government, including all those Labour governments. So they're in absolutely no position. And that's why I said centrally in this speech, if they want to fight on the economy, if they still think in some fantasy land that this is strong territory for them, they don't realise how much we've turned the tables now. They don't realise just how poor a card that is for them to play. Thank you, Anushka. Can I go to Paul, Channel 4?
It's Paul McNamara, Channel 4 News. Where's your jacket? Another glitter incident? Sorry, wrong question.
Don't tempt fate.
Look, John Crudder said he doesn't know what a Keir Starmer government would stand for. The same comes up time and time again in focus groups. Now, I know your team says you've got lots of policies, you've got 2 pages of them, but if 2 years in, both Labour policy chiefs, former or whatever, and voters don't know what a Keir Starmer government would stand for, what is it you are getting wrong?
Well, Paul, thank you for the question. Last year, I set out in more detail than I think any opposition leader has ever set out before, the 5 driving missions of the next Labour government. And I've just been through them. That higher growth, high sustained growth in the G7. There's no lack of clarity there. It's very clear what that means, measured in living standards across the whole country. An NHS, not just off its feet, but fit for the future. No lack of clarity there. Nobody said, what are you talking about? I don't understand that. The opportunities that children and young people need for the skills they need for their life and the work they're actually going to do. You can't say, well, that's a bit ambiguous. I don't understand that. Safe streets, halving violence against women and girls. What's ambiguous or unclear about that? And so, you know, and clean power by 2030, this idea of ensuring we have lower bills, energy security, and the next generation of jobs. There's no lack of clarity there. So I believe firmly that we've set out precisely what we're going to do. I've also said that these will be our priority. And I've said a number of times there will be good Labour things we won't be able to do in quite the way we wanted when we wanted. So set out in terms of what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to achieve it, and I take your question as an invitation just to repeat that so that hopefully those that still claim that we've not been clear can have another chance to remind themselves of all the things I've been saying for many, many months now. Thank you very much. Chris, GB News.
Thank you. Christopher Hope, GB News. You mentioned clean power there by 2030, lower bills, that would mean. How would you fund the 28 billion annual cost of your net zero measures? From borrowing or taxes? And a quick one about the darts last night. Has Luke Littler's maturity and professionalism shown that 16-year-olds are ready to have a vote? The voting age should be cut from 9 to 8.
Chris, Happy New Year. You're the first to breach the one question rule. I'm sure Beth is going to be vying to get that position back as quickly as possible. Look, on clean power 2030, the first thing to say is, let's be clear what the mission is, which is clean power by 2030. And that is one of our 5 missions, and we are determined to achieve it for all the reasons I've said, because with that comes lower bills, with that comes energy security. Putin can't put his foot on our throat, and with that comes the next generation of jobs. We've set out how that will be funded, the money that is needed for the investment that is undoubtedly needed, saying that the £28 billion will be ramped up in the second half of the Parliament, that it'll be subject, of course, to any money that the government is already putting in, and it'll be subject to our fiscal rules. And that means that if the money is from borrowing, which it will be, borrowing to invest, but the fiscal rules don't allow it, then we'll borrow less. So it's very clear, and that's why this attack is utterly misconceived on us. It's a very clear strategy, and frankly, I think most people understand the argument. It's an everyday argument that you have to invest in the future, and that's what we will do. It's the lack of investment, the lack of long-term thinking that has put us in the position we're in now. We're more exposed on the international market when it comes to energy than many other countries. Why? Because the government never took long-term decisions. I'm not prepared for an incoming Labour government to make that mistake. Thank you, Chris. Sorry, on the darts. Firstly, I mean, Luke Littler, I mean, it's been incredible watching the darts, seeing what he has done. I'm not going to claim I watch darts every day. Everybody knows football is my game. But it has been quite an electrifying couple of days. And I'm a big believer in 16-year-olds being able to express their views, have their vote, and win darts tournaments. I thought he did brilliantly. I think everybody's incredibly proud of him as a 16-year-old, with real composure, actually, as well. I mean, you know, to do that on that stage, in that way, just up the road from me in Ali Pali, was quite phenomenal, I thought. Thank you, Chris. Sophie from The Mirror.
Thanks, Keir. Sophie Huskisson from The Mirror. If the Tories reduce or scrap inheritance tax, will you reverse this if you get into number 10?
Look, on inheritance tax, we're fundamentally opposed to what the Tories are pretending they're going to do. They floated this, I think, last year. They're floating it again now. I don't know whether they're going to do it, but I would have thought by now that they had learnt the lesson that further tax breaks for those who are the best off with nothing for working people is not a good idea. And I don't believe in tax breaks for those that are already well off when there's nothing on offer for working people. So I wouldn't be doing what they're floating. We'll wait and see whether they actually do it. They floated it many, many times already. Thank you, Sophie. Matt from The Times.
Thank you. Matt Dathan from The Times. Immigration is bound to be one of the key issues at the election, and I'm not sure you mentioned that once in your speech. So I was going to ask you if that's all right, on illegal migration. You said you were open to the idea of processing asylum seekers abroad, either by allowing them to claim for asylum from abroad or sending them offshore. Where would you send those people who are refused asylum? And just very quickly on legal migration, this time next year you could be inheriting a policy to increase the family visa income to $38,000. Would you keep that or scrap it?
On the question of what we do with illegal migration, look, we've got a problem with the boats that are coming across the channel, and we need to stop them. Nobody should be making that dangerous journey across the channel, and the government has lost control of our borders, and that is why it's of such concern to many people in the country. And I'm open to credible ways of dealing with that. I think the most credible ways of dealing with that are smashing the gangs in the first place. Those boats are being made now pretty much to order. They're bigger boats. They're being stored and brought in Europe and brought across Europe to the north coast of France and being used there. Gangs are running this. Vile gangs are running this. Now, for 5 years I was chief prosecutor, and I worked with other law enforcement agencies across Europe to smash drug smuggling gangs, people smuggling gangs, terrorist gangs. It can be done. I refuse to accept that the only gang that can't be broken is the gang that is running this vile trade. And so that would be my number one, which is stop it in the first place. Put your political energy into that. I also think, by the way, that we should process the claims of those that are actually here. Most people would be pretty shocked to know that of all those that have arrived by small boats in the last year or so, only 1% or less than 1% now have actually had their claims processed. So the system is fundamentally broken, and then we need to have a system for returning those who fail to the country that they came from. On the specifics of your question about processing offshore, there's a difference obviously between processing offshore and deporting people to places like Rwanda. And that does happen in some cases already. The Ukraine scheme has an element of processing offshore before people arrive in this country. It can be done, and I'm open to sensible suggestions and credible solutions to what is very obviously a problem. But I've simply refused to back down from my central proposition that I do not accept that you can smash drug gangs, terrorist gangs, people smuggling gangs, but somehow everybody does not think you can smash the gangs that are running this foul trade in the first place. I'll never accept that. And I will continue to maintain that it can be done, and if we have a Labour government, we will roll up our sleeves, put our shoulder to the wheel and get on with it. In terms of the family visas, I think the government is already slightly adjusting its position on this, so we'll have to see what they say in the new year. But I've been clear, I hope, that one of the main drivers of lawful immigration is the fact that we don't have the skills we need here in this country. If you look at the rising numbers of work visas, care worker visas, they've gone hugely through the roof. And that's because we haven't got a skills strategy in this country to deal with it. And I think that that's what we need. And that ought to have the effect, will have the effect of driving the numbers down. And for good reason, because we should have a skills strategy. Thank you. Harriet from the Mail.
Harriet Line, Daily Mail. When the general election campaign comes, will you be prepared to do several head-to-head TV debates with Rishi Sunak? Or are you and your aides, as has been reported, keen to duck them?
No, well, that report is just nonsense. Look, I've been saying bring it on for a very, very long time. I'm happy to debate any time. I'm happy to be here. All these events I do, I take all the questions from pretty well all the journalists that are here. So I don't think anyone can accuse me of ducking scrutiny or debate. So look, I mean, as I've said many, many times, Harriet, just bring it on. Let's... Chloe at the Eye. Chloe.
Thank you. Just to go back to your earlier answer on income tax, you're attacking the Tories for frozen income tax thresholds, but saying Labour will not set out any changes to personal taxes until we see economic growth. Is that correct? And if so, what level of growth are we talking?
What I've said, Chloe, is that I think that before we get to the question of tax, we've got to grow the economy. And I know that that may be slightly different to what some Labour leaders have said in the past, that we've gone traditionally to spend or tax. I think we've got to grow the economy, and it's got to be measured in living standards across the country. I'm not going to put a percentage on that. We desperately need to turn this situation around because the economy has been flat for 14 years. That means people's wages have not risen significantly for 14 years, and everybody is feeling the pinch on the cost of living crisis. So before we even get to the question of tax, we've got to deal with the economy. Now, that's not to say there won't be changes to tax, but where there are to be changes for tax, we'll set them out, as we have done in the examples I gave earlier. Obviously, we've got at least another fiscal event before the election. We need to see what the situation is there. But in principle, I do want to see lower taxes on working people. I want people to have more money in their pocket. But the first lever that we will pull is the growth lever, because in the end, that's the only way to get the money that we need to fund our public services. Steph at the Express.
Thank you. Steph Spiro from the Daily Express. You have been on a journey over trans rights. So are single-sex spaces 100% guaranteed under a Labour government?
Yes. And I've been really clear and unwavering on this. From my time as Chief Prosecutor, I worked with a whole bunch of people on violence against women and girls and saw and know myself from my own observations just how important it is. So that's never been an issue for me. I was persuaded of that many, many years ago now. I was doing that work in 2008 to 2013. Thank you very much. Jim from the FT.
Jim Pickard, Financial Times. You've been very clear that you believe the Green Prosperity Plan is an investment in the future. But of course, the plan has been through changes in scope and changes in timing this year. It's been reduced in size and will be delayed somewhat. Can you guarantee that this plan will not go through further changes or further watering down before the election? And if you'll excuse me, the FT did a report this summer on a JP Morgan report which suggested that Peter Mandelson had stayed at the New York townhouse of Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 when he was de facto Deputy Prime Minister, and while the financier was imprisoned for soliciting prostitution from a minor. Do you think that Lord Mandelson, who is of course a close political ally of yours, has some questions to answer?
Jim, let me just first push back on the first part of your question. There is no question of pushing back on the mission. The mission is clean power by 2030. So nobody's pushing back on that. Nobody's saying we want a later date or half clean power or 50% clean power. I've been really clear from the start what the mission is, and there's no pushing back on that. Obviously, we've looked very carefully at the investment that's needed for that. The investment that we want to put in is intended to trigger private investment at a ratio of 1 to 3. So we've had, obviously, quite extensive discussions with global investors as to how that will work. And the date on which a cheque is written by the government is not the date the mission is delivered. The date the mission's delivered is 2030. That's the mission. Obviously, we've pushed back the ramping up to £28 billion. It doesn't mean there's nothing before that. It means it's ramped up to £28 billion, subject, of course, to the money the government may already be putting in and to our fiscal rules. But that is just sensible investment, looking at the changes since we first announced this in the cost of debt, but also looking at the practicalities, because now we're in quite intensive discussions with the partners that we hope to deliver with about what can be done when, what needs to be ramped up, what needs to be tackled first. And so, for example, planning would have to be pretty high on my list of priorities to start with to get the ball rolling on this. But I want to be really clear, there's no pushing back on the mission. The mission is clear, clean power by 2030. Nobody is suggesting that we're watering that down or pushing it back. On Peter Mandelson, look, and I do try to give pretty full answers in these sessions, I don't know any more than you do. And therefore, there's not really much I can add to what you already know, I'm afraid. And, you know, that's simply the state of the affairs. Thank you, Jim. I've got Martina from The Sun.
Thank you, Keir. Martina Bett from The Sun. You've just expressed a desire to lower the tax burden for working people, yet there seems to be no firm commitment to prevent an overall increase in the tax burden under a Labour government. Can you provide a concrete assurance that under your leadership, the overall tax burden will not rise and that there will be no new taxes?
Well, so far as new taxes are concerned, we have actually set out a number of areas where we will increase taxes. So VAT on private schools is one, ending the non-dom tax status is another, closing some of the loopholes in our system. And that's the approach we'll take, which is if we are going to increase taxes, we'll set out what that will be well in advance of the election and what the money will be used for. But when the burden, the tax burden is the highest it's been since the Second World War, then I don't see the way forward as increasing that burden, save in those express areas where we've said so. I do want the burden on working people to come down, but any tax adjustments have to be fair and they have to be affordable. And that's the difference between us and the government. Fair and affordable is the rule. But I go back to my central point, Martina, which is that in the end, we can argue about tax and spend all day long. If we don't grow the economy, that is an ever-reducing discussion that we're having, because we need to grow the economy first. And that's why everything I've said about the missions is premised on our argument about growing the economy. And all four missions ladder up to growing the economy, the fastest sustained growth in the G7. The NHS argument isn't just about health, it's about the economy. The skills argument for young people isn't just about skills for young people, it's about the economy. Safe streets is not just about safe streets, it's about safe places for our businesses to thrive on their high streets. That's about the economy. And clean power is to answer one of the single problems that almost every business tells me, which is my energy costs are through the roof and I can't afford it. And you need to do something to help me. So all of those ladder up to that. Thank you, Martina. I've got Amy from The Telegraph.
Thanks, Keir. Amy Gibbons from The Telegraph. You've been very critical of the Tory tax burden, as we've just heard. So what is more of a priority for you, cutting personal taxes or business taxes?
Amy, I'm not sure I can improve much on the answer I've given 2 or 3 times now. In the end, the focus has to be on growth. And I know the government is floating, tax cuts. This is what Liz Truss did. She floated tax cuts that were uncosted. And it crashed the economy. And working people are paying. They're paying more in their bills, paying more in their mortgages, even now. And so she's now rewarding, or the government's now rewarding, through honours, the people who broke the economy, for which working people who are watching this are still paying the price. I will never let a Labour government ever do that to working people. This isn't just an issue about going into the election with tactical positioning. I will never let a Labour government do what Liz Truss has done to working people. Absolutely not. And that's why we've been so clear careful if you like, cautious if you like, about the stability and the sort of fundamental rock that we need in our economy. Because that, as I said in the speech, what on earth are people supposed to think when they are paying more money every month on their mortgage, sometimes hundreds of pounds each and every month, and they look at the television screen and see the architects of their misfortune swanning around the House of Lords? You will never get that from a Labour government. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Now, coming off here. Hi, Darren. I think we're next door to you.